director of the FinOps Foundation. We are a part of Linux Foundation, so we're here at KubeCon. CNCF is a sister org for us. And unlike what a lot of Linux Foundation does, which is host open source code, we are basically hosting open source best practices and creating a community for a lot of developers and engineers, and also their business counterparts in like finance and other areas to come together to basically be better at managing cloud from a spend perspective, from a value perspective, because you had this whole sort of shift, or engineers didn't used to have to think about, when I click this button, I'm going to spend money in AWS or GCP or Azure, and now cost has to be part of the consideration, right? Because unlike the on-prem stuff, when you stop using it, you've already bought it, or when you wanted to start using something new, it's already procured. So big change in sort of how the purview has expanded, and how now there's also a collaboration that has to happen with finance folks who don't understand the cloud terms, the developers understand, but come poking around about what the spend is, if we're doing the right spend in the right areas. So the FinOps Foundation is all about essentially helping to push forward that discipline, which is really a way of working and a framework between the different parts of the business, engineering and technical and business and even procurement, to give them a common lexicon, a set of best practices, a framework for how to push this into not just being a retroactive thing you do once in a while, but actually part of the developer workflow, down to daily decision making.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, it felt like everything was exploding in cloud, and suddenly exec and financial teams are like, let's start doing some cost control here. How do we cut cost and things like that? So then it just created its own chaos almost in a way.
Yeah, and it can slow down engineering efforts, because if suddenly the CFO comes in and is like, this has got out of hand, we need to stop our cloud migration, or we need to have more controls. And so the beauty of FinOps is to try to make less of a mandate and more of a movement from the bottom up, where there's a clean part of the workflow feedback circle or loop for the teams.
Right. And then for those sort of maybe newer to the term FinOps, how would you describe it for developers?
Yeah, so it's a portmanteau of, I never know if I say that word right, of finance, the team finance, with ops, like DevOps, TechOps, some sort of technical team who's doing ops. And it's unlike DevOps, where you've actually created a new team that is pushed together from the two sides. This is not necessarily that. It's about how to enable those different groups, to come together. There's a bunch of different terms for this space. There's cloud financial management and cost optimization. They're all kind of synonymous in my mind. FinOps is just sort of the short, pithy version.
Yeah, because it's we know we need to do cost savings to start to get cost control, but going from A to Z, what is that North Star? How do we do it? How do we get, what are the right conversations with the team? And I think y'all actually broke it down into 3 steps, right?
Yeah, so there's it's a 3-step life cycle. Starts with inform, which is all about what am I spending, understanding it, right? And then optimize, which is how do I find opportunities to sometimes to save money, but maybe sometimes to spend more because I want to use a better service, or I want to invest in something. And the third is operate, which is where you actually take that into the business, where the engineers would actually go and make the changes, right? And it is a very continuous loop, because once you've made those changes, you then again need to go back and, okay, what was the impact of that spend? I just talked to a guy who's building this engineering organization at a very large, very, very large cloud spend. And they have this thing right now where no one will think about cost for 3 or 4 months, and then finance team will freak out, and then they'll do a big push on cost and clean it all up, and okay, and then they get back and they build up this technical cost debt over and over, and that's not a really great way to do it, right? They should be making small iterative changes as they go and constantly improving it, a crawl, walk, run iteration process. And that's really where we see companies and really engineering teams start to do, is how do we get those initial wins, to get the excitement about it, to get the patterns in place, to get the right tooling and visibility, and then head toward a really iterative model. But
it is an entire process, not just the quick win. So you just say, hey, we went here, hey, we're done, we don't need to worry about it anymore.
Yeah, and that's, everybody starts with that. The other thing is it's not really a company, a large one that maybe has a bunch of different engineering teams, dozens or hundreds or even thousands. All the teams are going to be at different stages of this, and different levels of importance with it, right? So that the FinOps team in the organization is a central team, but they're not doing the FinOps. They're working with all the 500 distributed teams, right, to start to bake these processes in and get them thinking about cost and get them working better with the finance side.
And then with the foundation for FinOps, are you actually actively working with companies? They come into you for help, and what's that? And I assume there's going to be a huge cost savings and other improvements too for them.
Yeah, we've got 4,500 members in it, and a little bit different than CNCF. When we talk about members, we're talking about people who do this work,
Right.
as opposed to companies who are like maybe in the space. So those 4,500 people come together in monthly summits to talk about, war stories and best practices. Everything's virtual for us still. There's training and education things. There's a FinOps certified practitioner course. There's FinOps for engineering course, which helps people understand why it's important. And it's got like 13 videos of engineers talking about their journey into it.
Right.
And then the third area that we are building out really aggressively right now is the FinOps framework, which is where our open source bit comes in. It's open source standards and best practices everybody can contribute to. It has a bunch of really good real world stories. So you'd be like, okay, I need to understand how to do cost allocation. Where did people struggle? And there's actually like videos and stories that, because we're a nonprofit, they're not case studies. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're not saying, oh, this is the best. People on there telling about their problems, or like, we haven't solved this yet. Here's where we won. Here's where we lost, and things like that. So it's a really good resource for, just sort of getting to the place where you're not alone. How do I start, or how do I get better at this journey?
Great. And then for our audience out there today, say, hey, that sounds great. How do I get started with it? How do they get involved?
If you go to FinOps.org, you can sign up and kind of pick your own adventure of how much you want to get involved. There's the listen only mode. We'll send you interesting updates. You can come to the summits. The summits are free. It's free to join, all those things. Then there's you can get really involved if you want and be in work. There's a Kubernetes cost optimization working group right now that is defining standards about how to do that. There's another one that is working on a waste reduction index. So you can plug into these groups and work cross-functionally if you want, contribute to the framework over time, and get certified if interested.
Very cool. And so since we are here at KubeCon 2021, did y'all have any big announcements, anything new and exciting that's happening over at the FinOps Foundation?
I should have had a big announcement for you. So the big thing we're kicking off right now is the second annual State of FinOps survey. So,
nice.
Yeah, so last year, I keep saying last year, it is 2021. We did it in January, but I'm already thinking about 2022. Last year, we learned a bunch of stuff about the space. We had like 900 responses representing like $40 billion of cloud spend. And we learned like what the top challenges were. And spoiler alert, the top challenge is getting engineers to take action on cost. We learned, how people are approaching it, what tooling is most popular, like what, benchmarking metrics. So we took all that data and we spent the last couple of months basically rehashing what's most important to get to next. And the community is wanting us, we're looking to do in the survey, essentially more benchmarking of, what great looks like around this area, helping to provide, they want us to provide a roadmap for how to get started and build the practice. So that's manifesting in this framework I mentioned, where it's like, we want it to be the ISO for FinOps over time, but initially we want it to be approachable and accessible, help you get to crawl and to walk. Right, so we're really focused on taking that data from the survey, which as in our practitioner, we have a lot of run stagers in there, and funneling that into the framework. So we'd love to, if people are in the space or already doing it, the survey would be a great thing. I think data collection starts in about a week. So I can give you the link, or it'll be at FinOps.org. You can follow along there.
Yeah, so we can get some people involved there. We'll send out the link to the survey for them to get involved. And then one other thing you also mentioned, you're a sister organization with Cloud Native Foundation. So how does that kind of work?
In terms of structurally, or like our interactions?
Yeah, that's gonna just for anyone.
The Linux Foundation is a really cool thing. I mean, it's like a foundation as a service, right? So. We are separate programs, and I have a separate budget and team and all these things, but we're able to do all this internal collaboration, right? So we just did a micro survey on FinOps for Kubernetes, right? That came out, that's got like a ton of information about where people are struggling and all that. Frankly, I think we're still trying to figure that out, because again, they're focused on the code and we're focused on the best practices beyond just those areas. But what we're finding a great overlap with things like, take Spotify has, Backstage, which is an active project at CNCF. The people developing Backstage are working over there on that. And then we've got the people on the other side who are using that for the cost side, right? Talking about how do we actually use it and deploy it. So I think we're still in the early stages of figuring out how to do things together. We've only been in the foundation for about a year, but lots of interesting collaboration points for sure.
Very cool. And then for those curious out there, how long has the FinOps Foundation been around?
2 years. So it was about a year before.
Is that launched in Barcelona or somewhere?
No, we actually launched, it was pre-pandemic. I guess it was March of 2019.
Oh, wow.
2.5 years.
Just about the point where everything went south.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a crazy time to launch.
Totally. Yeah. It actually worked out great for us because so many people have been able to attend our virtual events. And like the international community has just, we're in so many countries and languages, and we're translating the surveys, we're translating the, certifications. There's just a lot of interest and interesting places. Everywhere from, the usual suspects to like Brazil is huge for us with the cloud down there, and Russia's doing a lot and coming in, and we've got all the European countries, UK, and it's been really cool to be able to get those folks together, having conversations about what's the same in the practice and what's different, and then also to really start to connect people regionally. So yeah, if you're in Barcelona, we've got a meetup group there with 45 people who are doing this type of work that you can go meet in person when you can meet in person.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. And then it's an interesting space. Where did you get involved with this? What does your sort of career journey look like? When you're like 5, you're like, one day I'm going to be.
No, everybody doesn't understand how I'm in a nonprofit now. It's the first time for me. I mean, the short version is 11 years ago, I co-founded Cloudability, which was one of the early vendors in this space.
Sure.
And the thing that I learned and I was in it for 9+ years, a company called Aptio bought it. And the thing that I learned along the way that got me wanting to do the foundation was the technology problem wasn't really the hard problem. And people buy sometimes really great software and deploy it, and people don't use it, or the organization has to change, adapt to use it. And this cultural change that's happened to happen for, just like we had with DevOps, 10 years ago, I wanted to help empower the people who are using, whether they're using products or not, to do that. And the big thing that we kept hearing from folks was like, how do I meet others doing this? And instead of talking about if you're at a customer advisory board meeting, instead of talking about your product, I want to talk to the person sitting next to me who's my peer, right? And there was just no place to do that. So put it out there, started with 26 members back in 2019, like charter members, and now it's just growing really quickly. So there's a big need for it, because everybody who's got massive cloud spend or plans to have massive cloud spend or have cloud spend as a key part of their business has to go through this transition at some point.
Yeah, when they start looking at costs, there's definitely a shock at times.
Yeah, and that's when they start thinking about it, right? Invariably, it's like, oh, how did you hear about us? Well, we had a huge spike and somebody got really upset, and now I went to look for it. Yeah.
They're like, our managed service costs here, let's get it down to 50%, figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
And nobody knows how.
Yeah.
But so that's great for the things now. And then kind of like you did the one survey, and when we sort of look at the FinOps space, are you seeing what are some of the current trends you're seeing this year, and what are you expecting that will pop up in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, there's some perennial things. Like I mentioned, it's hard to get engineers to take action on cost optimization, because the conversation always goes like, well, do you want me to go spend time on that, or do you want me to ship this thing that we're working on, right? And invariably it's like, I could go ship the thing. But there's other things like shared costs are becoming a really challenging thing. Not only like shared pools of cost, like your support charges at AWS even, right? That aren't really tied to anybody's usage. How do you split those things out? But then also, how do you start to get your arms around the entire application's cost versus just this one piece or this service or your EC2? When to combine the license. So people are trying to get that total cost of what they're doing, so that they can start to move toward, and this is where things are going, I think, over time, more of a unit economic approach of it. So if I have the total cost, I can start to get to like price per service or API request, or I can start to even put revenue into it. Like, how much cloud spend do we need to spend to make $1 of revenue, right? And starting to get in that mode where you're not thinking about cost as a bubble. It's like one of all security and performance and cost. It's all these considerations that come together, because as I said, it's not necessarily about saving money. It's like sometimes we do see companies spend more to save developer time, right? For example. So FinOps is about enabling that decision-making so you can figure out where you want to invest.
Very cool. And then for KubeCon itself, since we're out here in 2021, it's hybrid, it's in person. Is this your first KubeCon? Have you gone to
It is my first one.
Very first one. And so what are your favorite moments or thoughts so far?
Just the crazy conversations I've had, like in the
hallway conversations.
Yeah.
You can't have on Zoom.
I know. It's every time I talked to, I was like, oh, yesterday I talked to that person about this.
Seeing them in person.
Yeah, it's been crazy to put those connections together. And I think in some ways, because it's a smaller conference this year, it's been easier because there's just fewer people and it's not the masses.
Not a Twitter conversation.
No. Yes, having meaningful conversations. So that's been really cool. Also, I'm new to the open source world. Just like seeing these stories of massive companies and how much of the world is built on open source. It's like 90% of companies have like some chunk, running open source, and how the whole movement is like enabling companies to specialize and get really good at that 10% that is like makes them better. And engineers are writing code that's like not redundant with things that 1,000 other people have written, right? They're using these building blocks is really cool to see. And then on the back end of that, how the community like comes together to like to share the best practices and contribute. And it's just an inspiring thing.
Inspiring, yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Last question. So are you on Twitter? Can people follow you there? And then what's your website? Anything else that people should know about or anything upcoming?
I'm laughing because I gave up on Twitter a couple years ago. I realized it was too distracting.
There it goes.
So I'm yeah.
No Twitter.
No Twitter. I know.
Follow.
It's like sacrilege in this community. I feel like, I'm on LinkedIn. I think there's less noise there, and people don't get cranky about things as
Depends
much.
on who you're following.
Yeah. Too many diversions into politics on Twitter.
For sure.
And then jr@finops.org is the email address.
Very cool.
Yeah, finops.org is the website, and always happy to have a conversation with anybody who wants to learn more about the space.
All right, JR. So you heard it from the man himself about the FinOps Foundation, their take on FinOps, all the great work that they're doing. Get involved with their survey that's about to come out. So JR, it's great to have you on.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.